It was supposed to be just another day at a new school for Lena Davis. But no one expected her to change everything. At first, they saw her as just another quiet, awkward teen moved to a new town, just trying to fit in. But the moment she stepped into Mr. Braxton's orchestra class, everything shifted. No one could have predicted how quickly the whispers would spread, how her ability would make her a target, and how the injustice that followed would unfold in ways that no one could have ever imagined. Lena Davis wasn't the type to be noticed. At 14, she was just beginning to adjust to her new school again. With her frizzy hair tucked under a hoodie, and a look of constant uncertainty in her eyes, Lena blended into the background. Yet, when she found herself face to face with Mr. Braxton, the orchestra teacher, everything would change in an instant. Mr. Braxton wasn't a bad man, but he wasn't exactly friendly either. The class was filled with eager, self-proclaimed musicians. When Lena walked in, her old, weathered violin tucked tightly under her arm, his eyes flicked over her with a sharpness that didn't quite reach kindness. "Great, another lost cause," he muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Without hesitation, he tossed her a violin that looked more like a joke than a genuine instrument. The others chuckled behind their music stands. It was obvious. This was Mr. Braxton's way of mocking Lena. But what they didn't know was that Lena was no ordinary student. The moment her fingers touched the strings, it was like the room froze. The violin, which had been treated as a mere prop by the teacher, began to hum under Lena's touch, each note, each string, singing with an intensity that shocked the class into silence. Lena's fingers moved effortlessly, dancing across the strings as if they were extensions of her body, weaving melodies that none of them could have expected. Mr. Braxton's eyes widened, the mocking grin on his face slowly fading into disbelief. He didn't know it yet, but Lena wasn't just a kid with a violin. She was a prodigy, someone who had the ability to challenge everything. But rather than awe, Lena received skepticism. The school couldn't accept someone like her, someone with such raw, unrefined talent. Soon enough, a small seed of doubt began to grow, planting itself in the minds of the teachers, the students, and the administration. It didn't take long for Lena to find herself at the center of a storm she didn't ask for. A week after Lena's shocking performance, things began to unravel. Rumors spread like wildfire. Someone from the orchestra had overheard Mr. Braxton telling his colleagues that Lena was troublesome. He never mentioned her skill, just the fact that she wasn't right for their school. Lena had played in the school's talent show, a bold decision for someone who normally shied away from attention, but the performance was magical. She poured her soul into the violin, letting the music speak for her. Yet, when the judges handed down the verdict, they made their decision clear. Lena would not win. The judges' reasoning was inexplicable. "She lacked focus," one of them said. "Her style doesn't match our standard." The injustice was too obvious to ignore, but no one spoke up. The other students saw it as a fluke, a one-time moment of inspiration. Her talent was brushed off, buried under layers of bias. The cracks in the school system began to show. But things took a darker turn when Lena was suddenly accused of something she hadn't done. It started with a missing violin. A prized, rare instrument that belonged to Mr. Braxton, now gone. His prized possession, rumored to be worth tens of thousands, had disappeared after a rehearsal. And somehow, Lena was the prime suspect. The police were called and a case was built around her. Lena's alibi? Unshaken but ignored. She had been at the library, studying for a math test, yet the school administration ignored all evidence that might have cleared her name. The violin had been found days later, carelessly discarded in a dark corner of the orchestra room. Yet the accusation stuck like glue. How could a 14-year-old girl, someone who had just arrived at the school, be accused of such a crime? The answer was simple. She was different. And different was dangerous. The next twist came when Lena's only ally in the case, Mrs. Connolly, the head of the art department, began to receive threatening letters. The letters weren't just about Lena, they were about the school itself. About how its image was being tarnished by Lena's strange behavior. Mrs. Connolly, who had been the only teacher to defend Lena, suddenly withdrew her support. She no longer answered calls, and her once vocal disapproval of the situation turned silent. Her sudden silence didn't seem natural. At that point, Lena realized that something was happening behind the scenes, something much bigger than her. The school's administrators had made it clear. If Lena wasn't stopped, they'd do whatever it took to ensure she never succeeded. The entire case against her was carefully orchestrated, with the evidence manipulated and testimonies altered to fit a narrative that wasn't true. But then, a mysterious figure appeared, someone who seemed to be on Lena's side. Detective Anna Ruiz wasn't like the others. She didn't look at Lena like a criminal. Instead, she saw a young girl who was being crushed by a corrupt system. Lena hadn't expected an ally to show up, especially not one who had ties to a family with a long history of helping the wrongfully accused. But Detective Ruiz was determined to expose the truth. She began to dig into the school's history, uncovering past cases where students had been unjustly punished for reasons far darker than anyone could imagine. The deeper Detective Ruiz dug, the more she discovered. Evidence had been planted to make Lena appear guilty, but it was no accident. The administration was hiding something far more sinister. The story didn't just stop at the violin. There were deeper, more personal reasons behind Lena's accusations. It wasn't just about her talent. Lena was the target because she was someone who threatened everything the school stood for. The truth wasn't just buried in the stolen violin, it was buried in the hearts of those who had silenced the truth for years. Lena's music was a threat to their carefully constructed world of exclusion and status quo. She wasn't supposed to belong, and they couldn't stand to see her rise. And then came the twist that no one saw coming. Lena had a secret of her own, one that no one had anticipated. It was the day before her final hearing, when the school was about to make its decision on whether to expel her or send her to juvenile detention, that Lena took the stage. She entered the school's auditorium with a violin in hand. The entire student body was present, along with the administration. They all expected her to fold, to give up. But Lena had other plans. As she began to play, the music flooded the room. But this time it wasn't just a performance. It was a message. The entire room fell silent, and Lena's music, her words, her story spoke louder than any testimony could. Her last note didn't just play on the violin. It reverberated through the hearts of everyone present, each chord striking with the weight of truth. And then, as the final note echoed in the air, Lena stopped. Her eyes met Mr. Braxton's, whose face was now pale with shock. The room was still. No one knew how to react. What would happen next? Would Lena's voice be heard? Or would the school continue to bury the truth? The decision was about to be made. But the one thing no one could deny was that Lena Davis had already changed everything. As Lena stood in the silence of the room, an unexpected phone call interrupted the stillness. The principal's assistant stepped forward, holding a letter, one that would either exonerate Lena or seal her fate forever. The letter was from an anonymous source, someone with information so shocking, it would turn the case upside down. But the letter had one final line. "Meet me at midnight. I have the proof you need." The room fell completely silent as the final note of Lena's performance echoed in the auditorium. The weight of her music lingered in the air, as if the strings of the violin had woven her emotions into the very walls. But then, the phone call. The principal's assistant stood frozen, holding the letter that had the potential to change everything. It wasn't just the letter, it was the timing. What Lena had just revealed in her performance was only part of the story. The real fight was yet to come. As the assistant handed the letter to Principal Hargrove, Lena's heart raced. Her mind spun with questions, and she couldn't suppress the rising tide of anxiety. Who could have sent this letter? What did they know that no one else did? More importantly, what would happen if the truth came out? Principal Hargrove broke the silence, his voice wavering slightly. This needs to be investigated immediately. We'll have a meeting first thing tomorrow." Lena clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. She didn't want to wait for tomorrow. She needed answers now, but she also knew the administration wouldn't be quick to make things right. The system was too broken, too ingrained in its own biases to ever admit wrongdoing so easily. "Do you have any idea who sent this letter?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The assistant shook her head. "We don't know. It was sent anonymously. But I think you should be careful. There are powerful people involved here, Lena. Powerful people." Lena had always known that her talent was never the real issue, it was what her presence threatened. The idea that someone had been working behind the scenes, attempting to right the wrongs done to her, felt almost surreal. That night, as Lena sat alone in her room, her violin resting on the bed beside her, she realized something that chilled her to the bone. The fight she was in wasn't just about one teacher's prejudice. It was about a system that had been built to keep certain voices silenced. And no matter how much talent or truth she had on her side, that system wasn't going to give up its hold easily. But she wasn't going to back down. The next day, Lena gathered her courage and prepared to confront Principal Hargrove. She had spent the night rehearsing her speech, her mind sharp and focused. If this letter was going to be the key to her exoneration, she would need to dig deep. She would need to expose the systemic prejudice that had been plaguing her since the moment she stepped foot in this school. As she entered the principal's office, she noticed the change in atmosphere. The usual polished professionalism was replaced with a heavy tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Principal Hargrove sat behind his desk, flanked by two of the school's top administrators, Mr. Braxton and Mrs. Connolly. The latter had always been a friend to Lena, or so it seemed, but there was something different about her today. Her posture was stiff, her face grim. "Lena," Principal Hargrove began, his voice strained, "we've reviewed the letter. The claims are concerning. It suggests that certain staff members may have been biased against you intentionally so. We need to investigate this further." Lena could see the hesitation in his eyes. His hands, once steady, were trembling ever so slightly. It was clear that the situation had escalated beyond what he had expected. But what shocked her more was Mrs. Connolly's reaction, or rather, her lack of one. She sat there in silence, her eyes darting around the room, as if avoiding Lena's gaze. Lena didn't waste a moment. She took a deep breath, her voice firm. "This isn't about one teacher's bias. It's about a culture that's allowed discrimination to fester for years. You don't just target students like me because of talent. It's deeper than that. It's about control. It's about power." The room was quiet for a beat, the tension palpable. Lena could see it now. Everyone in that room had a stake in keeping the status quo. And if she didn't act fast, her fight for justice would be buried under layers of fear and apathy. "Lena, you need to understand." Mr. Braxton finally spoke up, his tone defensive. "What you did in that performance, it was impressive, but it wasn't the right time. You're making things harder than they need to be." "Harder for who?" Lena fired back, her words sharp like the strings of her violin. "For you? For the system that's failing every student who doesn't fit your narrow idea of what's acceptable." Mrs. Connolly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, Lena thought she might speak up, stand by her, as she had in the past. But instead, Mrs. Connolly's lips pressed together in silence. It was then that Lena understood. The people she had trusted, those she thought would help her, were just as complicit in the system as the teachers who had wronged her. And that realization hit harder than anything. She had been alone in this fight all along. As Lena left the principal's office, her resolve hardened. She wasn't just going to expose the school's bias, she was going to take down the entire system that upheld it. No more would she sit quietly while those in power manipulated and silenced students like her. The truth was the only weapon she needed. But she couldn't do it alone. Lena knew that. She would need proof that couldn't be ignored. And as the day wore on, a plan began to form in her mind. That night, Lena met with Detective Ruiz in the library. The detective had been her unexpected ally, someone who had spent weeks investigating the school's corruption, uncovering decades of institutionalized prejudice that ran deeper than anyone realized. "I think I found something," Detective Ruiz said, her voice low. She slid a folder across the table, and Lena opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos, records, and email chains that revealed something shocking. There had been a concerted effort to undermine Lena's talent from the very start. The emails exchanged between Mr. Braxton and other staff members made it clear they had planned to sabotage Lena's future. But the most damning evidence came in the form of a phone call, a call that had been recorded by a confidential source, one of the janitors who had overheard Mr. Braxton discussing Lena's unwanted presence at the school. He had even gone as far as to say that Lena wasn't the right fit for their music program and suggested that the principal make sure she doesn't get too comfortable. Lena felt the fury rise in her chest. How could they? How could they try to erase everything she had worked for? This wasn't just a case of prejudice, it was an active attempt to destroy her future. The detective leaned in. This could be the break we've been waiting for, but we need to go public. It's time to let the world know what's really going on here. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Lena and Detective Ruiz worked tirelessly to gather the evidence they needed to expose the truth. They went public with the story, using social media and the press to bring attention to the injustice Lena had faced. The community, once passive, began to rally behind her. Students who had once been silent now spoke out, sharing their own experiences of bias and discrimination. The school board had no choice but to open an official investigation. And when the investigation was over, the results were nothing short of explosive. Mr. Braxton was placed on administrative leave, pending further review. Mrs. Connolly was reassigned to a different department. And the principal, who had once been so eager to cover up the truth, was forced to issue a public apology to Lena. But it didn't stop there. The revelations were far-reaching, exposing a web of prejudice that stretched beyond the school itself. The district had no choice but to implement sweeping changes, starting with mandatory training on diversity and inclusion for all staff. In the end, Lena stood victorious not just for herself, but for every student who had ever been silenced, ignored, or made to feel invisible. The system had tried to break her, but Lena had proven that no amount of prejudice could silence the truth. And as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place, Lena knew her journey was far from over. This victory was just the beginning. There were still many more battles to fight, and she was ready. But for now, she could take a moment to reflect. She had stood up, faced the system head-on, and shown the world that even the quietest voice could shatter the most powerful walls. If you believe in fighting for what's right and exposing the truth, make sure to subscribe and join me on this journey. We've only just begun.